Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, August 1st, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Austin pledges the U.S. will defend Israel. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said Wednesday that the U.S. would defend Israel if it faces attacks in response to its airstrike in Beirut that targeted a Hezbollah commander and the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas's political bureau, who was killed in Tehran. So Israel has not formally taken credit for killing Haniyeh, but Israeli intelligence has a long history of carrying out covert attacks inside Iran. And, it's very obvious that Israel is the culprit, and Iran and Hamas are both blaming Israel and vowing revenge. So Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei wrote on X, quote, "Following this bitter, tragic event which has taken place within the borders of the Islamic Republic, it is our duty to take revenge," end quote. So the New York Times later reported that Khamenei issued an order for Iran to strike Israel directly in retaliation for the killing of Haniyeh. This report, which cited 3 anonymous Iranian officials, said that he gave the order at an emergency meeting of Iran's National Security Council on Wednesday morning. So it looked like Haniyeh was killed late Tuesday night or early Wednesday in Iran. We'll get more into his killing in another story. But so that New York Times report, I think it's a little strange that Iran would tell the New York Times first about their plans to strike Israel directly. But I figured it's worth mentioning. So get back to Lloyd Austin, who he made these comments in the Philippines. So he was asked what assistance the U.S. would provide if a wider regional war broke out. Basically, what would the U.S. do if Israel comes under a major attack? And Austin said, quote, "We certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again," end quote. So he's referring to the U.S. and some of its allies intercepting Iranian missiles and drones that were fired at Israel in response to the April 1st Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. Iran waited, I believe that was April 14th, that they launched the attack. So Iran waited about 2 weeks before they responded to that one. And this was the first time that Iran attacked Israeli territory directly. And that could be the new precedent. There's what they did here. Haniyeh was in Iran for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. And Israel killed him while he was a guest of Iran. So it's very, Iran is going to respond. It's very embarrassing for them to have a high-profile guest killed like that. And it's really amazing to see the U.S. They're claiming, Austin claimed in these same comments that the U.S. is working to ease tensions in the Middle East. But they're providing unconditional military aid to Israel and vowing to defend Israel from any consequences it might face from these escalations. So, it's just going to embolden Israel, going to embolden Netanyahu, knowing that the U.S. is going to directly intervene. That's what the U.S. did when Iran attacked Israel. The U.S. directly intervened, and they're saying that they're going to do it again. And I think that there's a chance here, because we also have the big Israeli strike in Beirut. There's a chance here that Hezbollah, Iran, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, potentially even the Houthis in Yemen, could coordinate a major attack. And if they do that, I think it could involve the Shia militias targeting U.S. bases, in kind of a bigger way than they usually do. So there's the risk of Americans being killed. So, the whole thing is just a mess. And so these Iranian officials who spoke with the New York Times, apparently, according to that report, they said that a coordinated strike with Iran's allies was one option, although they did not mention the possibility of attacks on U.S. bases. Another option would be an operation similar to what was launched in April, an Iranian attack, missile and drone attack on Israeli territory. The next one here, Israeli killing of Hamas chief expected to derail ceasefire talks. So the Israeli assassination of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh in the Iranian capital of Tehran is expected to derail negotiations for a hostage deal in Gaza, for a hostage and Gaza ceasefire deal. Kind of an obvious point, but I figured it was worth mentioning some of the things here when it comes to the negotiations. So Qatar's Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, he has been mediating. He's been the mediator in these negotiations, and he expressed concern about how this assassination could impact those talks. He wrote on X, quote, "Political assassinations and continued targeting of civilians in Gaza while talks continue lead us to ask, how can mediation succeed when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side? Peace needs serious partners and a global stance against the disregard for human life," end quote. So Netanyahu was doing everything he could to sabotage the chances of a deal before his big trip to Washington, and that's something that's been acknowledged by Israeli media and Israeli officials. So this seems to be more, I think that's certainly part of the reasoning, the logic here but behind killing Haniyeh, because he was, he's the number one Hamas official outside of Gaza. Yahya Sinwar is the leader of Hamas. He is believed to be down, in the tunnel somewhere, hiding out. But Haniyeh is has been kind of the face of Hamas. And again, the top leader outside of Gaza. So that means he's been leading, the negotiations. And then they think that they're, going back to Sinwar, and he's the one ultimately making the decisions. But Haniyeh was a big proponent of a ceasefire deal. So that's who Israel killed. And, when we talk about progress toward a ceasefire deal, I mean, at least right now, there's not going to be any progress, as, the region is on edge right now to see what's going to happen. This could descend into full-scale war between Israel, Iran, the U.S., Lebanon. So obviously there's just not going to be any progress with negotiations. And meanwhile, the Israeli bombardment of Gaza continues. People are starving. Disease is spreading. All that continues. So again, so to get into the details of Haniyeh's killing, it's not really clear. The circumstances around his death are not clear. His deputy, Khalid al-Hayya, said that Haniyeh was killed while sleeping at an official guest residency in Tehran. And he said that Haniyeh was struck by a missile. And I saw Hamas said that in other statements that he was killed by a missile. At first, I assumed it was a shooting because, that Israel has been behind, gunmen killing Iranian officials, scientists, and IRGC officers inside Iran before. That's typically how they carry out the assassinations, as far as I know. But they said a missile hit this residence. There's no sign that any Israeli warplanes were active in the area, that they launched airstrikes. I think I know that Israel has a history of also using the small quadcopter drones inside Iran. They're intelligence assets inside Iran, or some might be launched from Iraqi Kurdistan. They're like kamikaze drones, so maybe that's a possibility. So I don't know. We might get more detail. But again, he was there for the inauguration of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. I always mess up his name. I even looked it up before we started recording. Pezeshkian, who is considered a moderate, and he pledged to pursue diplomacy to get Western sanctions lifted. He said that when he was inaugurated, that he was going to work to get sanctions lifted. So even though he might not have had a willing partner in the U.S., certainly was a chance that there could have been some direct engagement with Iran. But now this Israeli assassination also derails that. And I think that's probably part of Netanyahu's thinking. The night that what they consider a moderate is inaugurated as the president of Iran, talking about diplomacy, that night, Israel carries out a major assassination on Iranian territory. All right, so the next one here, Iraq condemns U.S. airstrikes as heinous crime and blatant aggression. So Iraq has strongly condemned a U.S. airstrike that targeted the country on Tuesday and killed several members of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, and that is a coalition of mostly Shia militias that was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS, and they are part of Iraq's security forces. And the U.S. attack came as Washington and Baghdad have been discussing the future of the U.S. military presence in Iraq. U.S. strikes against the PMF in 2023 and at the beginning of this year prompted Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani to call for an end to the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition in Iraq. So with that in mind, General Yahya Rasool, he's a spokesman for al-Sudani, said, quote, "Despite extensive efforts through political and diplomatic channels in the effort to end the presence and operations of the global coalition against ISIS in Iraq and transitioning to a bilateral security relationship based on mutual respect and safeguarding Iraq's sovereignty and security, the coalition forces have committed a heinous crime and blatant aggression. Such serious and uncalculated transgressions can significantly undermine all efforts, mechanisms, and frameworks of joint security work to combat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. They also risk dragging Iraq and the entire region into a dangerous conflict and war. Therefore, we hold the coalition forces fully responsible for these consequences following this flagrant aggression," end quote. So very strong statement. And again, this is supposed to be the U.S.'s partner in Iraq. This is the Iraqi government. And they go ahead and bomb their security forces without even running it by them. And obviously they would tell them not to do it. But so the PMF announced that at least 4 of its fighters were killed, and this attack came a few days after there was rocket attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq. And Syria, no damage, no casualties, but they responded with these airstrikes. So, of course, we say it all the time. The answer here is for the U.S. to get out of Iraq, get out of Syria. All this, it serves as a tripwire for a bigger war, puts U.S. troops in harm's way completely unnecessarily. And you got the Iraqi government saying they could handle ISIS. The Syrian government obviously wants the U.S. to leave. And the Syrian government and their allies could handle ISIS, but they just got to stay. And again, this U.S. bombing in Iraq came just hours after Israel launched an airstrike on Beirut, just like a couple hours after the U.S. bombed Iraq. All right, so the next one here, Hezbollah confirms commander killed in the Israeli airstrike on Beirut. So Hezbollah on Wednesday confirmed that one of its most senior military commanders, Fouad Shukr, was killed by an Israeli airstrike that hit a residential building in the southern suburbs of Beirut on Tuesday. Lebanese sources told Reuters that Shukr's body was found in the rubble on Wednesday evening, and at least 2 women and 2 children were also killed in the strike. Shukr, who is also known as Haj Mohsen, was a founding member of Hezbollah. According to Lebanon's Al-Mayadeen, he was one of Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah's closest advisors. Hezbollah said that Nasrallah would respond to the Israeli attack in a speech at Shukr's funeral on Thursday. Hezbollah said in a statement, quote, "As for our political stance on this sinful aggression and great crime, it will be expressed by Hezbollah Secretary General Saeed Hassan Nasrallah tomorrow in the martyred leader's funeral procession," end quote. So that's going to be on Thursday. Israel said that it targeted Shukr in response to the rocket that killed 12 Druze children in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Hezbollah denied responsibility for the strike and blamed it on an Israeli air defense rocket. Something that was interesting that Middle East Eye reported, Druze residents of the Golan Heights, who mostly consider themselves Syrian, rejected the idea of retaliation for the killing of 12 children. The Religious and Temporal Commission of the Golan Heights said in a statement, quote, "Based on our Arab Islamic monotheistic beliefs, we reject that a single drop of blood be shed in the name of revenge for our children," end quote. All right, so the next one here, man, sorry that I have to keep talking about this all week. Lots of nasty stuff we've been discussing on this show. An Israeli MK says raping Palestinian prisoners is legitimate. So this is something that happened on Monday, and it was one of those things. I saw a clip of this debate between members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, about this whole situation with the rape of the Palestinian prisoner who ended up in the hospital, and then the arrest of the Israeli soldiers. And this is something a member of the Israeli Knesset defended the idea of raping these prisoners. So a member of the Israeli Knesset has defended the idea of raping Palestinian prisoners after Israeli soldiers suspected of sexually torturing a detainee at the City Timon detention facility were arrested. The arrest took place on Monday, sparking protests from far-right activists, including several members of the Knesset and at least one minister in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition. In a meeting of lawmakers on the day of the arrest, Hanok Milwidsky, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, so he's a member of the ruling party, was asked if it was legitimate to, quote, insert a stick into a person's rectum, end quote. So he was asked if that was a legitimate thing for Israeli soldiers to do, and he replied, quote, yes, if he is a Nukba, everything is legitimate to do. Everything, end quote. And Nukba is a Hamas militant. So he's saying everything is legitimate to do. And we know Israel scoops up Palestinians from Gaza if they're just, they can do it for any reason that they wish. They call them all terrorists and claim that they're all linked to Hamas, of course. But I'm sure that is not the case for all of them. And according to many of them, we saw pictures of them rounding up men and young boys, very young-looking boys, as part of people who get round up and thrown in jail. So according to Haaretz, the Palestinian prisoner who was raped suffered from a ruptured bowel, a severe injury to his anus, lung damage, and broken ribs, and was taken to the hospital for an operation. So this gets more ridiculous. So you have a member of the Israeli parliament defending it. Obviously, you had members of Israeli parliament protesting the arrest. You think maybe they would say, that they're innocent, that they didn't do it. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying it's a legitimate thing to do. And it's, according to the Times of Israel, so they arrested 10 soldiers for this. 2 of them were released. They say that they were not the main suspects. But the Times of Israel reported that this legal aid organization called Honenu, Honenu, which looking into them, they provide legal defense for settlers, for extremist settlers and the things that they do in the West Bank. So they're representing 4 of these soldiers, and they are claiming that the soldiers were acting in self-defense when they forcibly sodomized the Palestinian prisoner. So that's what their defense is, apparently. So the condition of the prisoner confirms some of the worst allegations made by Palestinians who were previously held in this prison. As we've talked about, I don't need to rehash those exact details again. Really horrific stuff. But the next story here is more about that. The UN details Israel's use of torture against detained Palestinians. This article is from Middle East Eye. So the UN put together a report about the torture, and one thing that it said is that at least 53 detainees from Gaza and the West Bank have died in Israeli custody, and one of the allegations is that from a Palestinian who was there was that they stuck one of these metal rods up into someone's rectum, a hot metal rod. I believe maybe some of them were using them to electrocute them. And one person died after that, according to some of these Palestinians who were in these prisons. So some of the things here: the lack of basic necessities. Detainees are being denied basic necessities, including food, water, space, warmth, and hygiene, according to this report. And this is something Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, who has defended the Israeli soldiers who were arrested. He's basically defended the way that the Palestinian prisoners were treated. And he has said, we've intentionally reduced food. We're treating them worse. He's actually saying we should start killing them to make room in the prisons. So this is the guy essentially running the prisons as the Minister of National Security. He is in charge of prisons and police. This report also details allegations of torture and sexual violence, routine beatings, prolonged sensory deprivation, and dog attacks are among some of the torture techniques carried out by the Israeli military in the report. It also found prisoners being forced to kneel on gravel, electric shocks, being burnt with cigarettes, and given hallucinogenic pills, which that sounds like a nightmare. Men and women both suffered sexual violence, including electrocution of the genitals, threats of mass rape, and forced nudity, often photographed or filmed. A released prisoner described the guard putting a piece of a vegetable in his anus. This report also said that Palestinians in custody are denied products such as menstrual hygiene items. So just really horrific stuff. The report also detailed detention by Palestinian groups. Many hostages taken by Palestinian armed groups on October 7th remain in custody with violence and extremely harsh conditions, according to the report. Released hostages reported a lack of food, poor sanitation, surgery without anesthetic, and sexual assault. So those are allegations made by Israeli hostages who have gotten out. I've also seen Israeli hostages say that they were treated kindly, by their Hamas captors. Of course, that's relative, but all right. So let's hope that we don't have to talk about, that horrible stuff so much. We'll see, if these soldiers get prosecuted for what they did. All right, the next one here, Ukraine gets its first delivery of F-16 fighter jets. Ukraine has received its first batch of U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets from NATO. Bloomberg reported on Wednesday, marking an escalation of the alliance's involvement in the proxy war. So Bloomberg sources did not say how many planes had arrived, only that it was a small number. They also said it was not immediately clear if Ukrainian pilots trained by Western countries to fly the F-16s could use them right away, or if the process would take longer. We just know a small number of F-16s have arrived. The Washington Post just reported this week, I believe, that only 6 Ukrainian pilots were expected to finish their training by the summer. So that means only 6 F-16s could be used. If the F-16s are put into use soon, they're expected to operate far from the front lines as U.S. officials fear they could be easily downed by Russian air defense systems. Denmark and Norway are supplying the first batch of planes, and Belgium has also pledged to provide Ukraine with F-16s, but most won't be delivered for years. The U.S. has said the U.S. has not promised to provide the jets, but has helped with training and will arm the F-16s with advanced missiles. The Wall Street Journal reported on Tuesday that the U.S. has agreed to arm the Ukrainian F-16s with HARM air-to-ground missiles, joint direct attack munition kits, diameter bombs, lots of stuff here. AIM-9X short-range air-to-air missiles for the F-16. So the U.S. is going to provide them a lot of munitions to use. So the F-16s were initially sold as a game changer, saying that it would make a huge difference for Ukraine, but it's not actually really expected to make much of a difference at this point. All right, so the next one. Oh, I just realized, sorry, I skipped another Gaza section that we have. We still have some stories out of Gaza to go over. Israeli airstrike in Gaza kills Al Jazeera journalists. So this is from Middle East Eye. An Israeli airstrike near the house of Ismail Haniyeh in Gaza killed 2 journalists who were reporting on the Hamas leader's assassination in Iran. Ismail Al-Ghul, a journalist for Al Jazeera Arabic, and cameraman Rami Al-Refi were killed in the strike near the Aida area west of Gaza City. Al Jazeera Arabic's managing editor, Mohammed Mawad, confirmed their deaths on social media. Israel has killed more than 160 journalists in Gaza since October 2023. So a huge death toll for journalists. So again, the Israeli strikes, with everything going on, there's so much attention elsewhere, but the bombardment of Gaza continues. And then the next one here, over 80 patients evacuated from Gaza in the biggest operation yet, according to the World Health Organization. This article is from the New Arab. So at least 85 sick and severely injured patients from Gaza, including 35 children, were evacuated to Abu Dhabi for specialized care, the Director General of the World Health Organization said on Tuesday. So they did this big medical evacuation. They were transferred from Gaza via the Kerem Shalom crossing into Israel, then to Ramon Airport near Eilat in southern Israel, and then flown to Abu Dhabi. The WHO said, quote, 53 patients have cancer, including 4 children. 20 have trauma injuries. 3 have blood diseases. 3 have congenital conditions. 2 have Fanconi anemia. 1 has neurological conditions. 1 has cardiac disease. 1 has liver disease. And 1 has renal failure, end quote. So this, I don't think, was the one that Netanyahu canceled. That was for 150 children to be evacuated from Gaza to the UAE, which Netanyahu delayed or canceled that. This is less people, but at least some people are getting out for treatment. All right, so the next story, jumping back down on the page. Sorry, I skipped around there. I left up the one about the Philippines getting $500 million in military aid. And then the last story here, kind of a strange story. The U.S. reaches a plea deal with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So this article about this is from CNN. The U.S. has reached a plea deal with alleged 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 2 other defendants, according to the Defense Department. Mohammed, also known as KSM, was captured in Pakistan in 2003 for his alleged involvement in the terror attacks. In 2008, Mohammed was charged with a list of crimes, including conspiracy, murder in violation of the law of war, attacking civilians, attacking civilian objects, and other things. So the U.S. has said that it would seek the death penalty for Mohammed. Walid Mohammed Salim Mubarak bin Atash and Mustafa Ahmed Adam al-Hawsawi have also reached plea agreements, according to the Pentagon. The men agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a life sentence instead of a death penalty, according to the New York Times. The plea agreement avoids what would have been a long and complicated death penalty trial against Mohammed. So it's unclear where they're going to serve their life sentences. So they got a plea deal, no death penalty, life sentence. Not clear exactly why this happened. Maybe the U.S., one thing is that the so-called evidence against him is tainted because some of it was they got through torture. And then that they mentioned in this story that's one thing that has complicated his prosecution, is the fact that I think a lot of it is testimony that they got through torture, which we know is not good. So I wonder if it's something they didn't think that if it went to trial, if they would be able to win or not. But they made the deal, and I'm sure he knows and his legal team knows that he's being held in Guantanamo. So there's no laws, there's no rules there, so they could just keep him indefinitely. But still, again, who knows why this happened exactly. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Jonathan Cook, more dead children, more BBC News channeling Israeli propaganda, one from Stan and Priti Gulati Cox, starvation in Sudan, in Sudan, the missing war. Something I really should be covering more often is the situation in Sudan. It's really horrific. The next one here from James Weil, 2 decades later, the applause continues. One from Daniel Larison, abandon the failed Venezuela policy. And our spotlight from Muhammad Sahimi, assassination of Hamas leader in Iran, puts new president in a trap. So please go check all of that out. You could always support us by sharing this show, like and subscribe, tell your friends about antiwar.com, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.